It really makes you stop and think, an FBI file dedicated to extrasensory perception. I mean, you picture G-men, right?
Yeah.
Dealing with spies, gangsters,
Yeah,
not mind reading.
exactly. But that's precisely what's sitting here today.
Uh-huh.
A deep dive into this FBI vault document, simply titled Extrasensory Perception.
It looks pretty comprehensive, too.
Oh, it is. It's quite a collection. We've got memos bouncing between FBI officials, uh, names you might recognize like Belmont, Brannigan, Roach, Tolson, folks like that.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the main cover sheet, naturally, and a whole bunch of newspaper clippings. Let's see, Richmond Times-Dispatch, the News Leader, New York Journal-American,
Okay.
and then some really fascinating bits, correspondence about demonstrations for military intelligence and even the CIA.
Wow. So for you listening, our mission, our goal today is really to dig into this document. Why was the FBI back in the 50s and 60s even looking at ESP? What were these claims? Who was making them?
And what did the FBI actually find out, after their own investigation?
Yes. Right. Okay, let's dive in. The story seems to kick off with a Mr. William A. Foos around 1957. Now, just to be clear, when we say extrasensory perception here, what exactly are we talking about in the context of this file?
That's a good starting point, yeah. So in this document, ESP seems to cover abilities like telepathy, mind-to-mind stuff,
Okay.
and clairvoyance, basically getting information about things or events without using your normal senses, seeing things remotely, maybe.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of abilities the FBI was, curious about.
Got it. So the file starts with a report from Washington, D.C., July 57. Seems this Mr. Foos put on some kind of exhibition at the American Legion headquarters.
That's right. And the description of him is interesting. High school graduate, worked for the C&O Railway, only got interested in ESP like the 2 years before this. Not exactly a lifelong researcher.
And his big claim?
Oh, it was a huge claim. He said he could teach blind people to see within 6 months, even well enough to drive a car.
Wow, okay. Did he say how? Like magic, supernatural stuff?
No, interestingly, he specifically disclaimed any supernatural power. Said he had no scientific explanation. His line was basically, a person can do what he makes up his mind to do. Pure willpower, I guess.
Huh. That's quite a statement. And he claimed he'd already done it.
Yeah, claimed he'd taught his own family and about 25 other people.
Mhm.
He reportedly some who were completely blind, taught them to see with, and this is his quote, 100% efficiency.
100%.
Mm.
Okay, and he demonstrated this.
He did, using his daughter Margaret. She was, 16 or 17 at the time?
And what did she supposedly do?
Well, the reports, if you take them at face value, are pretty wild. They'd blindfold her pads, elastic band, the whole thing.
Right.
And she could apparently read text, tell colors apart, move around a room easily. They even mention her reading really tiny handwriting, picking out colored balloons from 400 feet away, even playing jack.
Playing jacks blindfolded, that's
It's
specific. And you can see how the FBI would start thinking, okay, what if this is real?
Oh, immediately. The memos show they started thinking about national security implications right away.
Yeah.
Could someone use this to, read classified mail, diplomatic pouches without opening them?
See inside secure buildings.
Exactly. The potential, as one memo puts it, was unlimited for law enforcement and counterintelligence if it was genuine.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
Yeah, almost instantly, yeah. Some, let's say, inconsistencies started showing up. When they asked Foos directly, can you read through walls, through the blindfold pads? He got kind of evasive. Mentioned defense aspects.
Defense aspects, meaning what? He wouldn't say.
Not directly at first, but then, apparently in a private chat, he claimed he had taught someone to read through cardboard. And seeing through walls. Oh, that was just a matter of degree.
That sounds a bit convenient, doesn't it? Like he's backtracking or qualifying.
It does raise an eyebrow, yeah. And you see this caution reflected in the internal FBI memos. An agent named Brannigan writes to his boss, Belmont, stressing that the Bureau's interest needs to be discreet, controlled.
They saw the potential, maybe, but weren't jumping in feet first.
Precisely. Proceeding carefully. The recommendation was clear. Send a memo to the Richmond office, where Foos lived, and loop in the mobile office, too. Keep it official but contained.
And the newspaper articles in the file, do they just repeat the claims?
Pretty much. They describe Margaret reading magazines, handwritten notes, Bible verses, all while supposedly securely blindfolded. You can absolutely see how this would grab headlines and, pique the interest of government agencies.
But digging deeper into the file, you start seeing cracks, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Foos himself admitted he had no formal psychology training. Said he'd read a lot about ESP, but that's different.
Right.
We also find out he was actually on leave from his job as a foreman at the railway. and his first experiments, just on his own kids and friends. Not exactly a controlled study.
Did he try to get any scientific validation?
Well, he did do a demonstration at Duke University for Dr. Joseph Rhine, who was a big name in parapsychology then.
Okay. And Rhine's take? Is it in here?
The file doesn't detail Rhine's reaction specifically, but it mentions Foos seemed sincere about wanting to help the blind. But, and it's big, but he refused to reveal his methods. Said he'd train instructors, but wouldn't share the how.
That seems counterintuitive if you genuinely want to help people, wouldn't you think? Share the knowledge.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
And right around then, he sets up a company, Extrasensory Perception Research, Inc., teamed up with some local businessmen.
Ah, business venture.
Looks like it. Their plan was to recruit blind kids, do more demos in D.C. and New York, and then open a clinic. It all sounds very ambitious, especially for someone without scientific backing.
And that ambition, did it run into trouble?
Oh, yes. The next batch of documents, from August and September 57, paints a much more skeptical picture. Other agencies started weighing in.
Like who?
Well, there was that demonstration on August 8th in Arlington, Virginia. Army intelligence guys were there.
Okay.
A memo from a George C. Blackwell who attended is pretty blunt. He said, yeah, Margaret read stuff blindfolded, but she couldn't read a simple ticket held above the table. Interesting. Held above the table, suggesting maybe she was peeking downwards.
That's the implication, yeah. And another young man tried identifying cards blindfolded, but his success rate was pretty low. Blackwell's conclusion: seemed like tricks. Simple as that. Always look for the mundane explanation first, right?
Good principle. Were others finding the same thing?
Yep. The FBI checked with the President's Committee on Employment of the Physically Handicapped. Major General Melvin Haas, the chairman, basically said, nope, claims not proven.
Okay.
Then the Blind Veterans Association sent people. They saw a demo, found zero evidence of ESP, and said, no thanks, we're not sponsoring this.
So the groups Foos might have hoped to impress were not impressed?
Not at all. And the Veterans Administration, even tougher. They called his claims baseless. Why? Because he refused scientific testing, and crucially, when they provided the blindfolds, the demonstrations failed completely. Ah, the blindfold swap. That's telling.
Very telling. They even asked the FBI to keep their negative findings confidential.
What about the CIA? They were mentioned earlier.
Right. Their assessment came in September 57. Very direct. They said Foos hadn't developed anything new or revolutionary. Claims not supported by facts. Full stop.
Did they have a theory on how it was done? The trick, I mean?
They really zeroed in on that specific blindfold Foos always used. They suspected it might allow for what they called pinpoint vision.
Pinpoint vision, like a tiny hole or gap.
Exactly. They noted how he insisted on his blindfold, how maybe the material or the way it sat allowed a tiny peek, how he refused to let anyone put a shield between Margaret's eyes and the reading material.
That refusal is suspicious.
And get this, she apparently couldn't read the same material if it was placed downwind from her.
Downwind? Why would that matter unless maybe she was sensing airflow changes or something subtle related to the paper's position or just couldn't peek in that direction?
It's odd, right? The CIA memo even mentions they were researching vision through tiny holes or around the sides of blindfolds. They were definitely looking for a conventional explanation.
So the FBI itself must have been leaning that way too by this point.
Absolutely. An internal FBI assessment from early September 57 talks about suspicions of gimmicks. Notes Foos' evasiveness, his refusal to demo reading through solid objects.
Right.
They also pointed out something weird. Foos claimed he learned about ESP from the Bible, but also told people he was an atheist.
Doesn't really track, does it? Raises questions about his story, his sincerity.
For sure. The memo also notes he was doing these free appearances for medical groups, and others likely, the FBI figured, to drum up interest for his planned clinic.
Trying to build buzz.
Seems like it. And crucially, when invited to let his daughter be examined independently, Foos refused.
Refuse an examination? That's another red flag.
A big one. So the FBI clearly thought something was off and wanted to compare notes with the CIA and Army intelligence, see if everyone was seeing the same problems.
Okay, so that's Foos in 57. The file then jumps forward a bit.
Yeah, to 1960. The focus shifts slightly. A newspaper article pops up in New York Journal American. Headline, Spying by Mind Reading. Sensational stuff.
Spying by mind reading? Who was supposedly doing this?
The article claimed Army intelligence was researching mental telepathy for espionage. This landed on the FBI director's desk, Hoover, presumably, with a simple question attached. Is there anything to this?
Straight to the point.
Yeah.
And was there.
The Army came back pretty quickly saying, no. No current project like that. They mentioned some older, inconclusive Air Force research post-Korea that touched on mental stuff, including ESP, but nothing active.
What about the FDI's own experts? The lab.
They weighed in, too. Their opinion.
Yeah.
Unequivocal. No scientific basis for ESP as described in that newspaper article. They did acknowledge, that the human mind has unexplored areas psychologists are studying, but mind-reading spies, no evidence.
And did they connect this back to the Foos case?
They did, explicitly. In their response, they referenced William Foos from '57, reminding everyone that the conclusion back then was no scientific basis and that other government agencies felt the same way. Shows consistency in their approach.
So initial curiosity followed by, where's the proof?
Pretty much. Relying on scientific evaluation. The file also includes a memo about the ongoing ESP research at Duke University, the parapsychology lab there, been going since '34.
Ryan's lab again.
Right.
Yeah.
It outlines their work on telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, using those ESP cards, trying to rule out chance. But the memo is clear. Most scientists were critical of the evidence and the methods.
So limited acceptance in the scientific community.
Very limited. The memo points out, reasonably, that ESP just doesn't seem to show up in everyday life. If it worked, you'd expect to see it. Well, everywhere. Making money on stocks, for instance.
Good point. Does the file touch on other psychic claims, like mediums helping police?
It does, actually. There's a section prompted by a writer planning an article. It mentions Gerard Kreised, a Dutch medium involved in the Judge Crater case, and Peter Hurkos in the Carol Jackson murder case.
And did they help?
Well, the file notes that Hurkos, in the Jackson case, apparently led investigators to the wrong suspect. Not exactly helpful.
Ouch. Not a great track record?
No. And it quotes a Dutch police official, Dr. Brink, saying there's no reliable evidence police actually benefit from clairvoyance. Scotland Yard apparently dismissed them, too.
What about Hurkos specifically? The FBI must have had a file on him.
Oh, yeah. Peter Cornelius Vanderhurk, a.k.a. Peter Hurkos. He claimed he helped police all over the world. The FBI memo states flatly.
Here.
We have no information to back that up.
Just claims, no proof.
Exactly. And the director's reaction to Hurkos getting involved in that Jackson murder case, he called it a circus and a complete fraud, doesn't get much clearer than that.
Wow, so Hoover was definitely not a believer.
Not in Hurkos, anyway. There's reference to a newspaper article where Hurkos claimed he could see the killer. Hoover's comments in the margins were very dismissive.
So, summing up the FBI's position after all this.
The FBI laboratory conclusion stands firm throughout. No basis in established science for extrasensory perception, as described in things like that Spying by Mind reading article.
And public opinion. Does the file mention that?
Briefly, it references a survey showing only a small percentage thought ESP was established or likely. Most people found it a remote possibility, or just impossible.
Which aligns with that idea of common experience, right? We just don't see reliable proof of it day to day.
Exactly. Which brings us back to the core issue. You have these fascinating stories, these captivating demos like Foos and his daughter.
Right, things that grab your attention.
But when you apply rigorous scrutiny, scientific investigation, the claims just fall apart. This FBI file is really a case study in that. Initial intrigue, potential applications considered, but ultimately they relied on established science and critical thinking.
Okay, so let's recap what we've pulled from this FBI Vault document. The Bureau, doing its job, looked into ESP claims in the 50s, particularly William Foos.
Right. Understandable initial interest, given the potential implications if it were real. But that interest quickly turned to skepticism as their own inquiries, and those of other agencies like the CIA and Army found no scientific backing. Just a lot of suspicion about tricks, like with the blindfold.
So the key takeaways seem to be this huge gap between compelling anecdotes and the hard requirements of scientific proof.
Absolutely. And it shows how an agency like the FBI, while open to investigating unusual claims, ultimately grounds its assessments in verifiable facts and established science.
Which leaves us with a final thought, something for you to maybe ponder.
Yeah, why does this idea of ESP, of psychic abilities, continue to fascinate us so much, even when the scientific community is, frankly, overwhelmingly skeptical?
What does that fascination tell us about ourselves? About our desire to understand the mind's potential, maybe probe the unknown, even beyond what science can currently explain?